This gluten-free chocolate zucchini cake is so rich and moist, you'll never guess it's packed with wholesome ingredients, including oat flour and Greek yogurt. It's the perfect chocolate cake without the post-dessert regret. Hello, my name is Nicole Bonilla, and if you love healthier recipes that taste amazing, then you are in the right place. Now you're welcome to jot down these ingredients as we go along, or you can click on the link that's in the video description below. And that will take you to the full recipe with all the details, including nutrition facts, ingredients and substitutions, and frequently asked questions. Now to make this really delicious zucchini cake, we're going to start by shredding our zucchini. So I just have one medium-sized zucchini. I'm just going to cut off the end. And then to make it really easy to drain afterwards, I'm just going to grate it right into my nut bag. Now this is also called a strainer bag, but you could also use a towel. And I'm just going to grate it right into the bag. Now zucchini is full of tons of water, so the next thing we want to do is drain out all of that excess liquid. So I just have a bowl here so I can show you just how much is going to come out. So I'm just going to twist my bag and squeeze it as hard as I can. And then you get this actually a beautiful green color of zucchini juice, which you are free to use however you like. So we got almost 1/4 cup of water out of one zucchini. And then it's going to leave us with 1 cup of shredded zucchini. And then we'll just set this aside. Now to make the zucchini batter, we're going to start with 2 eggs in our mixing bowl. And then we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of cane sugar. You could use any sugar you like. Next we're going to add 1/2 cup of milk, and you could use any milk that you like. And then to add some moisture as well as a little protein boost, we're going to add 1/4 cup of some plain Greek yogurt. You could also use sour cream or even whipped cottage cheese. And 1/4 cup of light olive oil. You could also use avocado oil. And 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then we'll just whisk this together until it's well combined. Next we're going to add our dry ingredients. Now if you click on the recipe link that's in the video description, that will take you to the full recipe, and there's a section called ingredients and substitutions. And I include several other flour combinations that you can use. But my favorite is to use oat flour with a little bit of gluten-free flour. Now you could buy oat flour or just grind it yourself, which is what I like to do. So we're just going to add 2/3 of a cup of oat flour. And then to help enhance the oat flour and improve the structure of the cake, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of some gluten-free flour. But you could also use some tapioca starch or even cassava flour. You can also use all-purpose flour if you don't need it to be gluten-free. And then for chocolate, we're bringing in 1/2 cup of some cocoa powder. And then we're adding 1 teaspoon of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then we'll just whisk this together until it's well combined. And then you have this gorgeous, luxurious, and very good smelling chocolate cake batter. And to add a little more chocolate flavor, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of some mini chocolate chips. And you can use any variety that meets your dietary needs. And then we're going to dump in our shredded zucchini. And then we're just going to stir this in until well combined. And it's so fun seeing all that chunky zucchini in the cake batter. I promise it will all blend in and you won't even know it's there. Now to bake the cake, we're going to use a 9x9 square pan. And I find it works really well to line it first with some parchment paper because it makes it really easy for getting the cake out of the pan. So I'm just going to set my pan on top of my paper that's a little bit larger. And then I can just score both ends and then fold it down on the score lines and place it down inside the pan, score the inside edges, and then fold the flaps over. And then I'm going to take a little bit of nonstick and just spray those exposed edges. And then we can just pour our batter down inside our prepared pan. And then I'll use my spatula just to spread it around so it's nice and even. And then we'll give it a few taps to remove any air bubbles. Well, this looks amazing, and it is ready to go into our 350-degree oven for anywhere between about 34 to 38 minutes, or until a toothpick comes out clean. And then while the cake is baking, we can go ahead and make our chocolate cream cheese frosting. So we're going to start with room temperature cream cheese, and we're going to use 6 ounces, which is 3/4 of a total block. And then we're going to add 3 tablespoons of room temperature butter. And then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of milk, and you could use any milk that you like, or I really like using 2 tablespoons of heavy cream. It just makes the frosting a little bit lighter and fluffier. So add 2 tablespoons of milk or heavy cream, and a teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and a few pinches of salt. And then we're going to blend this together really well until it is smooth and creamy. Well, that looks great. Next we want to add 1/4 cup of our cocoa powder. And then I'm adding 1 cup of powdered cane sugar. And I like to use the minimum amount of powdered sugar to make it a sweet tasting frosting. But you could certainly add more powdered sugar if you want it to be even sweeter. And then we'll just mix this all together. Well, that looks gorgeous and definitely needs a pinky test. That is really good. Has that little bit of tang and the chocolate, and is just sweet enough. And then we can set this aside until our cake is done and cooled. Well, here's our cake after it's baked and was allowed to cool completely. And you can see it has this rich, deep chocolate color with those little specks of zucchini in it. So now we can spread our frosting right on top. And I do like to have a fairly generous layer of frosting on my cake, so you will have plenty to work with. And then I'll just use my frosting spatula and spread this around. Now, if you could use more healthy inspiration on a regular basis, I invite you to join my email list. All you have to do is click on the link in the video description below, and that is the best way for us to stay connected. So once the frosting is spread out, I find it really aesthetic just to come in and kind of make some big swirls. Then you get those fun little peaks on top. And then you can just serve it as is, or you could sprinkle some chocolate shavings or even some chopped nuts on top. I find it's really fun just to do some chocolate sprinkles because sprinkles make everything better, right? So I'll go ahead and just sprinkle a few right on top. I like that this frosting is a little bit of a lighter brown color, which is a really beautiful contrast to the darker cake and then these dark sprinkles. Now you can enjoy this right away, or you can put it into your fridge and that will allow the frosting to stiffen up just a little bit. But I have a piece here that I made earlier and it is ready to enjoy. Has that nice thick frosting layer, which is my favorite. That is delicious. That is the perfect, most satisfying bite of chocolate cake. It has all the richness that you want, but then that light, fluffy frosting on top. And I love that little bit of chunkiness that you get in the cake from those mini chocolate chips as well as the zucchini. And there's so much flavor using the oat flour and then having the cream cheese in the frosting. And what I love most is that it's made with clean, natural ingredients, which means I'm gonna feel just as good even after I enjoy it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today in my kitchen. I've included the link to the full recipe and it's in the video description below. And that will take you to my website, gentletummy.com. And I also invite you to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I cannot wait to have you join me again in my kitchen.